The Darkness is a first-person shooter game that is based on a comic series with the same name. The most recent video game entry was released back in 2012, and since then fans have questioned if it is possible for Starbreeze Studios, Digital Extremes, or 2K to ever revisit the franchise for The Darkness 3. So let's break down why we haven't seen a sequel so far, and if it is even possible to see one someday. As always, all the sources will be posted in the description below, so make sure to check that out and support those articles. And with that out of the way, let's get into The Darkness 3. Let's start with some background to understand where the series ended up. Before the game series, it was a comic book series, which was created in 1996 and went on hiatus in 2013 and was published by Top Cow Entertainment. The first Darkness game was developed by Starbreeze Entertainment, which if you've been following this channel, you've heard me mention, because they are also the developer behind the Payday series and the Chronicle of Riddick games. So sometime in the early 2000s, Starbreeze reached a deal with Top Cow Entertainment to work on a Darkness video game adaptation. Kotaku described the deal saying, quote, "Top Cow Comics, the owner of the Darkness IP, gave Starbreeze freedom to interpret the comic book, but the team was wary of overstepping boundaries, hence a collaboration with award-winning comic book writer Paul Jenkins, who'd worked on The Darkness previously. Paul became sort of a liaison. We didn't really know if Top Cow would say stop at some point, so it was good to have Paul coming over to Sweden and work with him. Also, we knew he was probably one of the owners of the Darkness storyline, so whatever he liked would probably be okay." Now, given that much freedom for an IP is very rare, but I think it really helped the Darkness explore a different side of the character and to really make their own story. Majesco Entertainment was the original publisher for the game, but 2/3 of the way through the development of The Darkness, 2K bought the project and became the new publisher. Starbreeze mentions how it was working with 2K. They said 2K was really good to work with, but we noticed when the marketing started that they pushed the violent aspects of the game. For us, it was the adventure and the story that's what stood out. The violence was fun, but it was more of setting the tone for the story. We found the balance in the end where the game was presented as a strong story, but a dark, violent story. And when the game launched, it was received very well with a score of 80 on Metacritic, and as of 2012 had sold 1 million copies, which was enough for 2K to want to move forward with a sequel. And Starbreeze was approached first if they would start early production on the game. The quote from Kotaku said, quote, "2K expected us to do a sequel, and when we were interested in doing that, they were just surprised. When we were done with The Darkness and it got delayed quite a bit, a lot of the team were kind of sick and tired. It took almost 4 years to make that game. We were tired of contemporary New York City. We wanted to do something different, maybe something sci-fi, so they handed it off to another developer. And that makes sense. Starbreeze wanted to work on new titles, while 2K still wanted to explore the Darkness IP and use it. And the new developer they found was Digital Extremes, who had previously worked on the Unreal Tournament games and the multiplayer for Homefront and BioShock 2, and they also did the PS3 port of the original BioShock. Digital Extremes worked on The Darkness 2 for 3 years, and they released that new entry in February of 2012 for the PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, and PC. The game was met with the same praise as the last game from critics. It had a good story and unique shooter mechanics, but it really failed to translate into sales. The game did not reach the #1 position in any of the notable sales charts, and VGC Charts estimates the game has sold less than 500,000 copies worldwide. And one of the biggest issues fans attribute to the low sales of the game was the length of the game itself. While the first game was not considered a massive story, it at least had at minimum 10 hours of gameplay, but the second game only had 5 or 6 hours of gameplay, which is a hard sell considering how much you spend to get so little out of this title. So instead of buying the game, many fans instead rented the title regardless of how good the reviews were, because if you rented it, you could easily beat the game and there wasn't too much replay value. So word of mouth quickly spread, and that's why the game sold less than 1 million copies. And the future of the games seemed grim when 2K told Digital Extremes they would not receive funding to work on the Darkness 2 DLC, and 2K cited the lack of game sales. Plus, there was also some speculation that 2K wanted to shift their focus to Borderlands 2 and the DLC for that game instead, because that was an up-and-comer. They needed a lot of DLC to keep the fans playing, so 2K really shifted their focus and moved away from the Darkness. At the time, it did seem like the Darkness 2 was setting up either a new game or DLC because of the ending. This is a spoiler, so if you haven't played the game, maybe click away now. But Jackie makes it to Hell to save Jenny, but when he gets there, he realizes that Jenny is a host for the Light, which is an angel. The Light takes control of Jenny and leaves Jackie and the Darkness in Hell, and then just to be continued essentially with what's going to happen next in the story. So what does that mean for a third game? Well, both of the previous developers are very busy. Starbreeze is working on Payday, and most notably Payday 3, and Digital Extremes is always working on new games, but they also have Warframe. So if 2K wanted to bring back the series, it would most likely have to be a different studio. It also still depends on if 2K has the rights to make Darkness video games, or if they would have to make a new deal with Top Cow, which Top Cow actually might be willing to do. I mentioned earlier in the video that the comic series went on hiatus in 2013, but it was in 2017 that they announced they were relaunching the Darkness comic. It was supposed to come out in 2018, then it got delayed to 2019, and now I think once again it's coming out when it's ready. So they're building up hype for that. The comic series is coming back, and I think a video game could be a good way to get more people invested in the property again. Do a coincided launch between the comic book and the video game. Now, if they don't want to go and do a full sequel, because how expensive that could be, especially given the track record of the previous games, another option we could see is a remaster. Out of all the major publishers, 2K has been the most adamant about remastering their old games. They've done so recently with Borderlands, Mafia, and BioShock. And in my opinion, I don't think we will get a third game until 2K remasters the previous games. That's kind of how they work. With Borderlands, they remastered, then did Borderlands 3. With BioShock, they're remastering, and we know they're doing something more. And Mafia, they just remastered, and we assume that we're going to get a new game soon. So it's a formula that 2K uses often. So the Darkness 1 and 2 would be released to see how much attention they could get for the franchise again. Plus, with how short these games are, I think selling both together in a bundle and then maybe for $30, a remastered version of both games for the current or next gen consoles would be a really good way to get people back invested, to get people who maybe skipped out on the first game, and I overall just think it'd be a really good move for the business. Then, if the remasters sell well enough, they could release a new game in the trilogy by a new developer. And that, of course, is all assuming that Top Cow would allow them to continue the story. And that is why we haven't seen the Darkness 3 yet. The first game sold well enough to get a sequel, but the Darkness 2 failed to find its footing. It had canceled DLC, and I think there was always a disconnect between what game the developers thought they were making and how 2K wanted to market this game. The teams behind both games are very talented, but it was a tough IP to work on. Especially when the Darkness 2 DLC was canceled and the comic book was put on hiatus, it didn't seem like there was too much of a future for this IP at the time, and it didn't make sense to continue the franchise. But now I think there's been enough time, people are nostalgic for the game, the comic book is returning, and I think it would be a great time for 2K to bundle the games together and give at least a remaster. Then potentially release it to current and next generation consoles, which will gauge interest, and I think enough people would be interested and we could have a real shot at a new game. The only other thing I'll mention is just a rumor that started because of a PlayStation 5 UI concept video that was posted on Facebook, which I believe now has been removed, but it included them flipping through different games that people were excited for, and one of the games was The Darkness 3, so they put together a logo, a background, and some dialogue. It was included only for a few seconds in this video. I'll show it off very briefly. Obviously, it's a concept video, it's not real. There's no truth to anything they're saying, so I know a few people were getting excited for that, but it's not indicative of any game. It's just something they put together to get people hyped up. So if you see any news circulating around that, that's why it's happening. But that's really all I have to say on the topic. That's what happened to The Darkness 3 and why we haven't seen anything about it. And that's where I'm going to end this video. Make sure to like and share, subscribe for weekly gaming news, and I will see you guys in the next one.